I want to thank you for joining us today in our continuing study series. I'm Pastor Jerry Burney. We operate a jail and prison ministry which mails out weekly studies and biblical messages, and once every year our ministry sends out a book to every inmate on our mailing list. So if you know of someone in jail or prison, please contact us with their name, ID number, and address. And you can visit us at our website, burneyfam.com or targettruthministries.com. Now, in today's series, we're exploring a scenario of how the end times, the end of days, might unfold with the return of Christ. The primary book used in this series is, let me find the switch here, is this one here called the Book of Chronologies and Time Charts. And it contains many time charts of biblical history. And it concludes with a timeline of the end times of the world. And this is a unique study, unlike any other. The other book we're using is this one here. It's a Revelation of End Times, Apostasy, and This Generation. And it follows various prophecies and explores the book of Revelation verse by verse. And you can get our books at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, either in paperback or as an e-book. And the Book of Chronologies is available through our web. Our ministry also provides a study series on science and origins, which is this book here, Ancient Civilization, and we have another study series on Genesis and the two creation accounts from this book here. Please visit our website, burneyfam.com or Target Truth Ministries, for news, updates, and to access studies, messages, and much, much more. Now, just as a synopsis, we started off with talking about some issues. When the rapture happened. Take a look at this slide here. It's when was it written? We discussed that, whether it was written before or after the temple was destroyed. And then we discussed the timing of the rapture. Spent some time discussing the timing of the rapture. And then we discussed the four different views of when Jesus might return, when the rapture, the resurrection might occur. And we talked about the preterist view and the amillennial view, postmillennial, and premillennial. So we've already discussed all those, and we're now getting into prophecy. And we're going to resume where we left off last time in prophecy. I'm going to start with Daniel chapter 2 and read that. Daniel chapter 2, verse 31 to 35. And in 31 it says, Daniel is going to give an interpretation of the dream from the king. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And you continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. And then the iron and clay and the bronze, the silver and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, as we're going through our study, we're going to take a look at some of these prophecies, not just in Revelation, but the ones that tie into it too, from Daniel. Daniel here is giving a picture of the empires all the way back to the time when he was in Babylon. The head of gold was the time of Babylon when he was there, and he was giving a prophecy that the next kingdom to come along would be a kingdom with two arms, and that was Medo-Persia, and that's followed by the kingdom of brass, which was Greece, followed by the kingdom with two legs and a mixture of iron and clay, and that was Rome, the Roman Empire, the east and west parts of the Roman Empire. Now we're going to find as we get through some of these prophecies that these are defined more clearly for us in Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8. So I want to go over and look at Daniel chapter 7 right now, because here he has another vision, but it's of basically the same thing. And Daniel chapter 7, verses 3 through 7. Daniel 7, verse 3 through 7, it says, And 4 great beasts were coming up from the sea, different from one another. So in the first vision we had 4 types of metal: gold, silver, bronze, and then the iron mixed with clay. Here we're going to see 4 beasts. The first was like a lion and had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. Verse 5, and behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. And after this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And verse 7, after this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And then it says, while I was contemplating the horns, another little horn came up amongst them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled up by the roots before it, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth uttering great boasts. Now, one thing about this prophecy, Daniel, as you recall, was giving these prophecies during the time of Babylon. But here down in verse 17, he makes another statement. In verse 17 he says, These great beasts, which are 4 in number, are 4 kings who will or shall arise from the earth. That means it's not only a current prophecy that he's giving for near term, but he's saying that this Babylon beast will also arise, and the others as well, will also arise in the future sometime. He's speaking at the time of the Babylonian beast, and yet he's saying that these 4 beasts shall arise in the future. So it's a near-term vision, and it's a far-term vision. And we can take a look in, I want to take a look here out of our book in chronologies, and I'm going to take a look at this historical placing of these different kingdoms and talk about what this future kingdom might be. Now, we were told in Daniel chapter 2 that the first kingdom was gold. We recognize that as Babylon, where Daniel was speaking from. In Daniel 7, he called it the lion, the first beast being the lion. And of course, the lion was symbolic of Babylon. And then he said in verse 17, These shall arise in the future. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 32, the second beast was silver of the statue. And Daniel chapter 7, he called that the beast bear. And of course the bear was for Medo-Persia, a symbol of them when they were around. And then in Daniel chapter 8, he lists beasts that arise called the ram. And in verse 20, he defines the ram for us as Medo-Persia. So we know that the Medo-Persian Empire, Persia was basically the big partner in that, was going to conquer Babylon, and that's exactly what happened. So the images on 3 different visions are that it was silver, it was a bear, and it was a ram. And then we go further. The third kingdom mentioned in Daniel chapter 2 was brass, and we see that that also lines up with the leopard of Daniel chapter 7. And that was defined in Daniel chapter 8 as a goat in the other vision. And that was defined for us as Greece. And of course we know that Alexander the Great conquered the world for Greece, set up his capital in Babylon at the time. And just a reminder, in Daniel chapter 7, in verse 17, it says, These shall arise in the future, meaning all of them, including Babylon, in a different form, of course, but in other words, these kingdoms will show up again in the future. And then we see that the last kingdom, Daniel chapter 2, calls it the kingdom of iron and clay. It had 2 legs with 10 toes. And we see in Daniel chapter 7 that he describes this as a diverse beast. And of course this becomes Rome, which came in and conquered the world after Greece. And Daniel chapter 8 describes it as the evil one. Of course in the future this will be the source of the evil one, the Antichrist, the kingdom which will control everything. Now, look a little further here as we go. We're going to take a look at what happened in prophecy with Israel. Here we see a picture of what Israel was like from 1923 to 1947. They were not a country. They're called Palestine, and of course there is a study in this book of chronologies on the word Palestine, the Palestinians, where that word came from. It's actually a derivative from a Greek term that means wrestler. And of course we know from Scripture that Israel was the one that wrestled with the angel of God. And so we see that there's a prophecy that Israel is going to be restored. This is Ezekiel chapter 4. And we're going to take a close look at that prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 4. Let me go over to Ezekiel and just read the prophecy. It's a pretty strange prophecy, but we'll take a closer look at it. Ezekiel chapter 4. And I'm going to read verses 1 to somewhere down towards 8. It says, and God's talking to Ezekiel. It says, "Now you, son of man, get yourself a brick, place it before you, and inscribe a city on it, Jerusalem." So he's supposed to get a stone, a brick, and inscribe the word Jerusalem on it. It's a prophecy against Jerusalem. And then lay siege to it. Build a siege wall. Raise up a ramp, which pitch camps and place battering rams against all around. In other words, if Ezekiel is going to show somebody what's going to happen to Jerusalem in the future, he's laying out this brick and he's going to build up all the armaments against it. And then verse 3, "Then get yourself an iron plate and set it up as an iron wall for you in the city, and and set your face towards it, so that it's under siege, and besiege it. This is a sign to the house of Israel." And then in verse 4 is where the prophecy begins. "As for you, lie down on your left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel on it. You shall bear their iniquity for the number of days that you lie on it. For I have assigned to you a number of days corresponding to the years of their iniquity, 390 days. Thus you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel." So he's supposed to lay on one side for 390 days, and it says here that a day represents a year. In other words, there's going to be 390 years of turmoil and trouble for Jerusalem. And then in verse 6 he says, "When you've completed these, you shall lie down a second time, but on your right side, and you'll bear the iniquity of the house of Judah. I have assigned it to you for 40 days, a day for each year." So we have 390 and we have 40, that Jerusalem's going to come under siege. Now I want to take a look at, in the book here, and talk a little bit about this prophecy. In the book here I write about some of these prophecies. And this is a prophecy that was given that Jerusalem is going to be under siege, it's going to be destroyed as a country, and then at the end of the 390 and the 40, it's going to be restored as a country again. So they're going to be under siege for a while, under somebody else's rule, and then they will receive their country again. Now Chuck Missler in 1998 determined that this great prophecy of Ezekiel 4 had been fulfilled to the exact year by the restoration of Israel as a nation, once again after almost 2,500 years of being under other nations' controls. Remember now, Israel lost their control when Assyria and Babylon came in and conquered them, and they didn't become a country again until 1948. In Ezekiel chapter 4, God commands Israel to lay on his side as a prophecy against Israel for their iniquity. In verse 5, the 390 days are to represent the years of oppression they will have to endure. And in verse 6, another 40 more days or years are added because of iniquity for a total of 430 days or years. Now in Leviticus 26, God tells Israel that 1, if they obey him, or if they disobey him, they will suffer their enemies ruling over them. So here's the warning that somebody's going to be ruling over them. This happened with the 70 years of captivity by Babylon prophesied by Jeremiah in Jeremiah 25. And it happened beginning in 605 BC with the first siege of Israel. And then, it says in Leviticus 26, if they do not obey, in other words, once you have been punished, if you do not obey, then he will increase the punishment 7 times for the remaining punishment yet to be served. Now, Israel served punishment for 70 years, which was the fulfillment of Jeremiah's prophecy, yet they failed to worship God. Therefore, the remaining 360 years of punishment would now be multiplied by 7, resulting in another 2,520 years of punishment. So if we take the 390 days or years that Ezekiel was prophesied to lay on one side and add 40 to it that he was prophesied to lay on the other, that's a total of 430. And if you deduct the 70 years that they had already served with the foretelling of Jeremiah, that 430 gets reduced to 360. And if you take the 360 times 7, because they still refuse to worship God, then that becomes 2,520 years. And if you multiply that times 360 days, and we must remember now, the Jewish calendar is based on 360 days, not 365. But if you multiply that times their annual year, 360, you get 907,200 days and that they were going to remain without being a country under somebody else's control. So accounting for the Jewish 360-day years and all the leap years and days, etc., this amounts to 2,483 years, 9 months, and 21 days on our 365-day calendar. So you got to find either a Jewish calendar or use our calendar to figure this out. That Israel must serve in oppression under other nations' rules, in addition to the first 70 years they served in oppression under Babylon. Now, the Persian cylinder of Cyrus, held in the London Museum, records the sieges of Israel and Jerusalem, the beginning of Israel's punishment, as well as the destruction of the city of Jerusalem later on. Now, from the first siege of Israel, and that's recorded in 2 Kings verse 24, to the establishment of Israel as a nation once again, which took place on May 14, 1948, this prophecy was fulfilled exactly to the very year of the 70 years plus 2,483 years and 9 months and 21 days. And by the way, this fulfilled another prophecy as well, because Israel became a nation in one day within a 24-hour period, like was prophesied by Isaiah in chapter 66. Now, what's interesting is that further from the third siege, which was the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. So the first siege in 605 was the destruction of the country, but then the third siege actually destroyed the city of Jerusalem. And that took place in 586 BC, and that's recorded in 2 Kings chapter 25. And so from that siege to the uniting of the city of Jerusalem to the nation of Israel, which occurred on June 7, 1967, because of the Six-Day War, this prophecy of Ezekiel 4 was again fulfilled exactly to the very year of the 70 years plus 2,483 years, 9 months, and 21 days. Now, do you think this is just a coincidence? I think history and science confirm the Bible's accuracy. Now, in Luke 21, and we're going to take a look at this in just a second. Well, let's read the verses first. I want to take us over now to Matthew chapter 24 and take a look at what happens when Israel does become a country. This is where we're going to take a look at prophecy now. The prophecy, when Israel becomes a country, what is going to happen? So first we'll look at Matthew 24. And Matthew 24, verse 32 to 42. And Jesus is going to tell a parable of the fig tree. And he says, "Now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branches have already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer is near." And it's always mentioning summer. You recall in the Daniel prophecy it mentions summer too. Summer is the harvest period. And the end times is pictured as a great harvest. God knows how to fit the words in to fulfill his prophecy. In verse 33, "So you too, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." And then he goes on, we won't read it right now, but he goes on to say that of that day and hour no one knows. It'll be like Noah, the time of Noah, when things are going on. But the main point here is that immediately he says that after the tribulation of those days, learn the parable of the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth its leaves, you know that summer or the harvest is near. So when Israel, the fig tree, became a country again, it was as if it was signaling us that summer is near. It hadn't been a country for over 2,520 years. Now, the same prophecy is mentioned in Luke 21 too. It's recorded in all the Gospels. But in Luke 21, where a little piece of information is added. In Luke 21, we're going to look at verses 29 to 32. And again, he tells them this parable, and this is the way Luke recorded it. He says, "Then I told them a parable. Behold the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they put forth leaves, you see it, and know for yourself that summer is near. So you know when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near." So here we're given a little piece of additional information. Not only when you see Israel put forth its leaves, do you know that the harvest is about to come, but also recognize that when you see the other trees put forth their leaves also. So what exactly does this mean? Well, let's take a look in here. So Jesus gives this prophecy in Luke 21, verse 29 to 32, of the generation which would see his return. This generation, it's called, which sees the trees coming out of dormancy. So it's not the generation of Jesus' time. He's not referring to that generation. He's referring to the generation that sees the trees come out of dormancy. And the fig tree coming out of dormancy is Israel. It became a country in 1948, and Jerusalem's restored in 1967. The fig tree is a common Jewish reference to Israel. Now the other trees we see coming out of dormancy also were established at the same time. And now this is where some commentators say, well, he's just referring to an orchard, a bunch of trees coming out of dormancy. But one interesting thing happened at the time Israel became a country after World War II. So did these other countries: Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Libya, Palestine, Iran, Greece, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, even India, Pakistan. All these countries became countries again right after World War II at the same time period that Israel became a country again. All the other trees coming out of dormancy. These were all part of the Byzantine and Ottoman empires from the time of the Roman Empire and World War I, and all became countries again at the time of Israel. Now, some commentators will say that this generation cannot refer to the end times because other references to this generation in the New Testament always refer to the generation of Jesus. However, out of all these references, there are three of them are to this fig tree generation, which is future. 4 are to the generation of Jesus' time, and 7 are references when Jesus is telling his generation that he will give them no signs. And no signs of the end times, which means that when he gives them the sign of the fig tree, he is indeed talking about a future generation. The references in Luke 21, Mark 24, and Mark 13 list many signs of the end. And as to the period of time of this last generation, we read within the context of this very prophecy of Jesus in Matthew 24, verse 37, that the coming will be like the days of Noah. And if you recall, in the days of Noah, he declared 120 years as the maximum time limit which God would tarry with man, which means Jesus could return any time before 2068, 120 years after 1948. Now, even though these references are interesting and encouraging to those who want to see Jesus, one must be extremely careful. No one knows the day or hour. And even though the events going on in the world indicate the prophecies are being fulfilled right before our very eyes, and the Bible seems to indicate that the generation which saw Jerusalem restored to Israel would be the generation which Christ will return, we must wait patiently on our Lord and not trust in human understanding. So we need to be careful. No one knows the day or the time. Now I want to take a look now at another prophecy, And this is a prophecy when not only will Israel become a country, but then the next thing that happens in our timeline is that the gospel needs to be taken to all generations according to Matthew 24. So let's go back to Matthew 24 and read that. And that's found in verse 14. It's talking about people going, in verse 9 he says, they will deliver you to tribulation. You'll be hated by many nations. False prophets will arise. And then in verse 14 he says, the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. Now, we have a society today called the Wycliffe Society, which is translating the Bible into trying to translate it into all the languages of the world. They get closer every year, but they haven't quite made it. So the gospel has not been taken to all the world. Now, there's several ways of looking at this passage where it says the end won't come until the gospel is taken to all the nations of the world. One way is that we need to do it now, and that's what the Wycliffe Society is trying to do. Another way of looking at it is that when the two witnesses in Revelation 11 begin preaching, because they will preach for 3.5 years at the new temple that's going to be established, they're going to be preaching and the whole world will hear the gospel message from them preaching at the temple in the end times. So that's another way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that the end that Jesus is talking about is the end of the millennium, because as you recall, there's another, after 1,000 years after the end times, there's another period of time called the millennium where Jesus will be sitting on the throne in the temple, and he will be giving the gospel to all nations. So it's either, this passage can be taken either at our time, this has to be fulfilled, or either when Jesus comes back, it'll be fulfilled by the two witnesses at the temple, or Jesus himself will fulfill this before the very end comes, which is at the end of the millennium. So we don't know exactly when this is going to happen. I want to thank you for joining us today as we're going through this study series. If you have anybody in jail or prison that you know of, please contact our ministry with their information, and we'd be glad to send out weekly studies and messages to them. And until next time, God bless.